Okay, yay. Okay. Yeah, I was going to cover just a real quick. I don't know if I want to continue or just do a little quick outline thing about it. Yes. Yeah, I wanted to include some information that I've been thinking about involving the kernel. And some idea of like programming or the thought. Really, I am completely going on my memory, and a lot of this stuff, I mean, I'm just like glancing and skimming the surface, or word of mouth, or other factors is kind of in depth, and it's all originating, really truthfully, from June of 1992, really truthfully so, involving the beginning thing about the alphanumerics and linguistics, practical application, integration, compatibility, and analytical, symbolic, and all that stuff. But anyway, yeah, so like I just want to include something that I was thinking about, because real quick before including like birthstones and some idea of like Abraham Lincoln, my vision based upon him being the only president studied in American history anyway, in the dark that way, and what night vision that way is. And it seemed to be like really significance involving the alphanumerics of the number 6, whether it be a 6-year or 6 presidential term in office, or 6 in the way of like what would mean in value, likewise in addition, or 6 being like 28 and 24, and I think this alphanumerics is 52, 28, 48, 52, and it ultimately gets to the thought of the thing about a VPN, what that is to the heartbeat of America, or, the thought of like getting baptized, during the cult rush, and yeah, that thing about being on a VSAT thing about the stagecoach. But anyway, yeah, so like it ultimately gets to like prepaid postage of Calamity Jane, and what Calamity Jane and the clam is to the ladder in the river, or the delta force in a way of the biggest mouth of the river. And it seems to be like the deal about the clams, like how did the clams even get in the river to begin with? But ultimately, the thing about if it's only the idea of like prepaid postage of the Pony Express, and Calamity Jane and the clam, or, thought of like Elvis Presley and the clam bake. The thing with this is that the clam is ultimately getting to, the thought of the Delta Force, or the thought of how true it is. I hadn't put too much thought into why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject, or the thought of one side of the pyramid, or some thought of a pronoun not necessarily being disregarded as maybe some thought of somewhere in litigation, or whether de facto is the factor of whether or not if litigation is going to urgently be the ultimate result of whether or not if de facto is an issue of settlement as compared to annuity. I mean, the word, litigation is corporate terminology that way, and it's so very much about the structure identified as an entity, and the eternal thing about an eternal structure, even the thought of like what eternal life is, and that way, or some factor of like re-entering heaven, and what re-entering heaven is to the resurrection in that way, or some thought of something of sub-amphibious reality beyond like a normal standard non-degreed issue, or even degreed issue like still in the bank is ultimately, really, truthfully, really what it's getting to in the history of a mailbox. But anyway, I thought I'd include something about that, because I'm thinking about quite a bit. And just a real quick, while I was thinking about, because I'd mentioned a little bit earlier about certain songs. Okay, like I'm a drummer. Okay, I have quite a bit of like a presentation in a way of verbal content, other than me on my drums and with the lighting as a drummer, using what normally I've used really truthfully as standard. Getting to my original music is predominantly going to be that. So in that way, yeah. So like anything other than like me on my drums with all the lighting, and what would be considered my thought of like a standard of a portfolio as a drummer. I'm also a singer as well, but the thing with this is that I haven't done like very much of that yet. I do that like all the time as involving, but as far as me on the drums as a drummer and a singer, yeah, there's like a thing going on about that. But So in any case, so like I have some things to say and quite a bit of like verbal presentation like this way right here. But yeah, I just want to do that because like I listen to music so very much, and it seemed to be like the real deal sometimes, and I'm wondering how true what We International is to like Capitol Records, or what Capitol Records is to, you know, the thought of what a star really is capital in a way, or what human capital might only mean, involving, you know, internet protocol of making a grade beyond the local area network, or what wide area network is, in the way of like what might only represent maybe a memorial, still something in the way of like something land in the way of like need to get a little bit more beyond the thought of above it all in that way. And it seemed to be that about a local area network and land that way, but a wide area network seems to be, you know, the issue of some idea of like in my mind, you know, the rectangle of like the hood ornament Lincoln Continental, and the word continental automatically the international financial management thing about the word globalization, and you know, the 90 degree seems to be like, you know, the real deal about the what that is to, you know, the quadrants of the rectangle on a tennis court based upon, you know, how many players are on it, and some Y2K, you know, technologically advanced innovation, ultimately getting to some issues and entertainment law. In any case, yeah, so like I was thinking about that because, you know, I just mentioned, and it's not really the first time, but, you know, like I practiced some songs, and I actually have a one that I really like, and it happens to be, you know, really something that's it's just like I've listened to it and practiced it like for years, and like for like the last night, it's just like for the first time I really thought about, you know, the beginning of the word "make it real," you know, and it's kind of like tonight it's been a year, met each other here, and it goes on and on. I mean, it just those two phrases right there. It seemed to be like something involving like Japanese being 7-1 Pearland, or the thought of like what a quadrant is to, you know, 3 months being like 3 months of a 12-month year being like a quadrant, or even a 90 degree based upon pronunciation of just, you know, 3 months being a quarter, or, you know, 0.25, or even the letter Y. Ultimately getting to the pronunciation of the word Y, WHY in 56, and all that stuff about paper made in 5610, annotated, and abortion, adoption, you know, Roe v. Wade, and it goes on and on. Okay, anyway, so like I was thinking about something about that song, because it seemed to be like all of a sudden, you know, my thought of like zodiac identifying normally would be somewhere in my mind a 3-month period. So I haven't really, you know, in my mind it's just like, I mean, if that's what it would be, I would almost assume that it would be some idea of like a cumulative rollover that way, like a fiscal annual would be as a point of origin, as a beginning, or the thought of a point of origin that would represent maybe a cumulative rollover based upon when it started during the calendar year as a, you know, set standard. But anyway, so like I was thinking about that because that song by the Jets, it seemed to be something about that, make it real, and somewhere in between like the pastel colors of like birthstone, representing, you know, the quadrants, or something in my mind that would be almost like Abraham Lincoln night vision in that way. And, you know, what the rectangles on a tennis court is based upon the thought of Y2K. And, you know, all that terminology wasn't available, like, in the beginning, like, during the 80s, that I'm aware of anyway. It really wasn't really until, like, you know, like, maybe the last part of, like, 1997, and I think 1998 is when I really started hearing quite a bit about the Y2K and to the new millennium beyond, you know, the year 2000 in 1999. And what, in my mind, I see something about cumulative rollover and COVID-19 representing, you know, at a, you know, a transition between 1999 to the year 2000, or the alphanumerics of what money is, or in that way, in a method of banking. But it seems to be like, you know, I had to focus on some idea about the zodiac and some pastel, because, you know, 73 is like Harris and Egypt and the Israeli flag, and some schematic, you know, electronic schematics of a triangle. Although a pyramid does have 4 sides, it's a triangle, yet, you know, a pi or square factor of a triangle would present, you know, what would be from a 3-point triangle to a 6-point, 2 triangles being a 6-point star, like with the Israeli flag. And my thing about the pi r squared, okay, and the E equal MC squared and the exponential quotient of powers of multiplication is just like practical application when alphanumerics linguistics. It's not necessarily always considered a normal standard of how it's really taught and really used mathematically, but based upon just pronunciation and almost naive of not being required using it the way it's really intended to, normally at an academic level, but on normally more so than not a personal level of alphanumeric linguistics, although linguistics is taught on major universities, the study of language. I haven't seen anything about alphanumerics really ever on any major university or any academic of any degree plan, or that likewise in addition combined with like linguistics, and it presents a whole entire different perception in that way. But anyway, I was thinking about that because I was thinking about the zodiac and like the Leo being like an August issue, and the pastel colors of the birthstones as compared to maybe like what I'm thinking about right now is the song like by the Jets, Make It Real. And tonight, it's been a year. I mean, I'm listening to it and I'm thinking about it, along with some other issues. Because like during the 80s and predominantly like from 1990 to 91, there had been, thoughts of, what Traffic Masters and American DJs in the way of like flybys and communication that way being talked to, kind of like, I mean, if it's just got to be the radar love thing in a way of like the attention getting thing about the effect that the tube is predominantly when it's live from like an American DJ or in combination with a Traffic Master or some certain factors. I mean, the effect is like really intense. But anyway, it's something very much I'm sure that anyone who hears it when they're being talked to like that will not ever forget it, really. That's like the seashell on the front lines of the beachfront. When it's tilted, it presents that sound of what would be the waves on the beachfront. Yet at the same time, that effect, that way, with amplification and signal processing and everything involved, I mean, it's like really mega intense. Any case, because I was thinking about that, and it's like the one particular time, it seemed to be like the day and night issue of a specific area. And getting the perception of being sang to by that song, and I know that like some singers, like I myself, as a musician, like practice as a standard what's being provided as a self-taught based upon like what I like listening to. And really, as a drummer, I mean, it's more than 3,000 songs of probably right at 200, if not more. But predominantly, the thing about focusing on favoritism is getting into the progressive side of like a. Yeah, and I'd like to include, the progressive heavy metal, hard pop, punk rock thing about, drum, but, predominantly on the progressive side of rock. And, kind of like calming down to the thing about where it all began kind of like thing, normally as a pretend, involving, normally automatically, singing, is normally first with like most people anyway, that's like really attracted to the thought of audio production or the idea of like, music in the form of, and maybe progressing into the thought of like music videos and audio production and all that stuff. Well, anyway, so like, I look back and play some of that stuff that originated as something I'd like to sing, which is normally on a more softer side of rock or pop rock or, the idea of like even contemporary in that way. But anyway, yeah, so like, I was thinking about that because I was driving around getting the perception like I was being sang to that one particular song. And by the Jets, and I'm not saying that it was actually anything other than my perception of knowing that as a drummer, practice make perfect, the perfection as a standard, using it like as a portfolio, or the thought of even singing that way of, I don't necessarily like calling it imitation, or maybe the thought of maybe an intellectual issue, whether or not if infringement is only a breach of like royalty, or my thought of using standard as a portfolio on YouTube is predominantly motivated as a standard, as a portfolio, not limited to. And really, there's been other issues and factors that I have to actually, quite a bit about going ahead and just saying what I have to say about, like legal media and deposition, or what auditing might only maybe present as the thought of what having the right to assemble in a venue is in entertainment, or what that as a neighborhood is as compared to maybe the thought of a commercial venue, or what absentee voting is in the way of the thought of proper English grammatical composition, or some idea of intellectual as compared to maybe why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronoun cannot be used as a subject. And there's other factors. But anyway, I was getting a perception of that because I had a whole new perception of that one song. And it seemed to be like the deal about the Chinese calendar. My birth year being 1964, and now it's like the year 2023, okay? And I've been thinking quite a bit about that Abraham Lincoln night vision, simply because of the hood ornament being the Lincoln Continental and the tennis court, providing, whether or not if it's the thought of Y2K, or, the singles being identified as one, yet involves 2 players, and the marginal spread on a tennis court that way presents the 4 rectangular quadrants that way. And it seemed to be the big deal about Abraham Lincoln night vision that way when it gets to a wide area network, or truthfully the hood ornament being vertical, or the 90 degree, what would be normally like rectangles engraved, granite being engraved, identifying like high-rise towers of power, or, huge commercial venues. And my thought, like going through like a circuit, or, my thought Stargate program seems to be really the memory being like, really the biggest factor, and really realizing that it had been, and not realizing it, and it had been, the thought, realizing it had always been at the entire time, and not even, and knowing it, and one realizing, at that point that, hey, wow, that was an issue of not even remembering something about it, and then all of a sudden realizing to maybe consider, maybe thinking about stuff like that. But yeah, so like anyway, so like that's what I'm talking about, referring to the rectangle, involving, the thought of like what would be vertical normally of the hood ornament, yet at a 90 degree would present, even, pronunciation of like whether, going beyond the thought of like of a local area network is only, whether if commerce dictates whether or not, if, any idea, anything beyond the front lines of the beachfront would represent something beyond maritime law of liquidal equity, or some thought of maybe increasing the value, and whatever that value and what it means, whether it's an issue of color code, or what constitutional law represents as a black dot on a map, or if family law is even a reality, making a grade even at a business level of like business law, or, what that is to an equator. Likewise, or a degree or non-degree issue still yet in the same. In my mind at this point, even a degree in a bank is just, thinking that, anything about a bank would be maybe only the thought of maybe constitutional law on the black book of statutes annotated, or, the thought of paper mate being the alphanumerics, and pronunciation of paper being, the 56, the Y2K representing, maybe, E equal MC squared, and only 2 words of paper mate being the pronunciation of mate, ultimately getting to, whether if, the alphanumerics of 10 is the numerical value of the word spelled out being 10, and the alphanumerics of 39, and presenting, paper mate like 5610, seemed to be like, the big deal about alphanumerics and linguistics. And it seems to be like really the biggest one in my mind, since my name is WadeASVPriddy, okay, and the alphanumerics of 213. And the thing of it is that really, obviously I focus on it because, in any case, it seemed to be, the thought of whether knowing or not knowing, or whether if it's just written, seems to be really the issue of whether if it's just an academic level of only maybe what Chase Inc. means to, some idea of like the thought of like participating in penmanship is not anticipating like any mistake at all, as compared to the thought maybe of being led by the Spirit, or having a need for correction, or the thought of like in need of an eraser. For real. But, if it's ultimately getting to something involving that way, like that, Chase Inc. it seems to be like, my thought of like what it means to be, like for it is written kind of like thing about the alphanumerics and linguistics going through a circuit that way, or the thought of like a Stargate program. And ultimately it seems to be like really whether or not if it's going to be the thought of a wide area network involving EA Sports, or the thought of even like the USFL, Houston Gamblers, and what arena football is, or the duration of like, why is it the Houston Gamblers? What's the deal about the Gamblers, okay? Is it USFL? It only seems to be the exact opposite of LF, of like what I've been referring to, involving like Mercedes-Benz and a smart car, and Cyan IQ, the highest possible highest possible score on an IQ is 200. Yet Zion is spelled S-C-I-O-N, yet pronounced sometimes like a Z, like Zion. I think about 1,000 years apiece, or maybe my thought of maybe a color code representing what the United States codes annotated mean to the New Testament in a way of separation between church and state. A prerequisite at a federal level of the United States. But the thing with this, I mean, ultimately it gets to whether or not if that's just the idea of like a Better Business Bureau or some Vantage Low 30 or the Alphanumerics of 70 being, Vantage or like Better or Better Business Bureau or like a secret, okay? And it seems to be like really the deal about in the tennis court that way of like secret de facto. What de facto is predominantly, when I was studying like the United States Supreme Court, Southwest Court Reporter, I really focused on Southwest for not really limited to because of like, Southwestern Bell identifying the Houston area in a blue color code. Predominantly, I automatically, just naturally by reflex, looked at it and really just predominantly stayed with it at being a Southwest Court Reporter just because of a color code of like Southwestern Bell that is now like AT&T and the color code of like whether it's a pastel or just a baby blue thing and the color code of like the white and blue thing of like the 1040EZ ultimately getting caught, whether or not if really a telekinetic roll of the pen only represents maybe the thought of maybe only what accuracy means or a Corvette in animation, thinking that a hood ornament would only be the thought of maybe only decorative or the accuracy identifying maybe what participation really means that way. I'm assuming that a hood ornament would present the complement of a decorative ornamentation that would provide, some idea of like accuracy as a complement, yet of academic, yet not necessarily an experience, academic yet classroom, but not necessarily beyond the classroom kind of academic. But while going through the circuit, realizing something about the Corvette, it seems to be the deal about the name Aryan Sky Angel Vatten, or some idea of like a veterinarian. And you've heard it before as far as like vets involving, the service in a way of like what would be presented in the form of like the idea of whether if military is only the difference between, terminology, whether the word soldier is really the thought of maybe a non-degreed issue or a thought of a breach that maybe, you've heard the phrase probably for unknown soldier would maybe possibly present maybe only the alphanumerics of 112 or Houston or, what that is in principle in algebra in a way of like, it's like the biggest deal about algebra when introduced, to the basic thing about algebra. It's like finding the unknown. It's like almost, the first, solid first 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, almost nonstop. It's like something I hadn't forgot, really, truthfully so. But the thing with this is that ultimately it gets to like the deal about the 3 rules and what the 3 rules are involving nominal, binomial, trinomial, equations. And the thing about it is that the 3 present whether or not if absolute values of 2 vertical bars is or is not even used or even the thought of even needed, or what rule applies and what rule of the 3 rules apply to whether if it's in combination or interchangeable. And I've had it in the classroom that way, and it's like really not cool not being explained that way and it happening and thoroughly changing the whole entire perspective, okay? Like the intended use of pi r squared would be intended, like the radius times 3.1416. It gets the diameter of a circumference of a circle, ultimately getting at an isometric value in a cylindrical shape, normally identified as volume, anything above the surface, okay? Yet pi r squared, like taught again, it presents the issue of like finding the circle, and whether or not if it's going to be the area or a circumference is only the idea of whether if really truthfully if the word curriculum is the only combination with practicum, defining the meaning only when and where that is an academic thing or an entire university issue. I mean, it seems to like really gets to whether or not if that's really the real deal about whether or not if litigation de facto is only an issue of whether if writs of habeas corpus is only the thought of maybe a garnishment in a way of maybe some idea of settlement using a corporate term that's focusing predominantly on eternal factors some idea of like, even the 12 tribes of Israel, some eternally valued thing. It's supposed to normally represent something about eternal life and all that heavenly stuff about what, eternity means on this planet, or in corporate terminology. Yet at the same time, on a religious thing involving Christianity, it presents whether or not, if, the truth about it is really, whether or not, the thing with it is, in any case, so like, I don't want to just go off into that right now, but the thing with this is that corporate terminology is really, based upon, really eternal factors in that one word entity of structure involving architecture, and then there's the word relation. It seems to be the only one that seems to be the significant of how it's pronounced, relation, or relational. In any case, yeah, so like, that seems to be a big deal between, architecture and platform as compared to, embedding and encryption. And the thing of it is that really the reason why I'm saying something about this is because it seems to be like the idea that would be comparable to zodiac, as compared to like the Chinese calendar. Yeah, it seemed to be like whether or not if really the 1 year is a calendar or a fiscal annual that would represent whether or not military time is only the issue between like a Chinese calendar presenting. How true it is, I haven't like really looked, other than just the mere thought of that one song, having a whole new perception, of the Jets in that one song, make it real. Anyway, like I was driving around like back in the 80s, and I mean, without a doubt, I was getting that perception of being like sung to like live that way. And I've been talked to that way. I mean, if you got a just idea, place some idea of what a song Radar Love is, well, involving, something about the American DJ and like Traffic Masters and some sound effects of YouTube. And like now I'm on YouTube. Okay, this is the year 2023. Okay. Excuse me, 2024. This is January 2024. In this video, I might have actually said it with the video I said tonight's ridiculously, kind of like, oops. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so like really January 2024. But I was kind of like focusing on Dr. Pepper because of the year 2023 and GMC, raising a bar. Kind of like I was really concentrating on. It's kind of hard breaking the habit of automatically saying 2023 in January 2024. I just, oh yeah. Anyway, so like I thought I'd mention that real quick, while I actually realized, hey, did I really hear that come out of my mouth, or did I just like really just set it as like a habit thing for real? But anyway, yeah, so like this year 2024, and it seemed to be getting to that one song, and I have a new perception of maybe the thought of what a Chinese calendar is as compared to maybe a quadrant of 3 months representing some idea of like what a cumulative rollover would only mean to maybe a fiscal annual, maybe even a military factor as a point of origin. And the 190 degree of the one and only latitude being the equator, representing some idea of, if it's like an automatic quadrant of what Lincoln Continental Hood Ornament would be to night vision, as a flat plane surface as a horizontal, or a wide area network as like it's there, but it's like at a 90 degree, it's like the longitude. Okay, all the vertical lines are longitude. And, like really it seems to be like a VSAT, and almost like telematics, like OnStar is to General Motors, and, predominantly like a Chevrolet thing about the telematics being like, tracking systems like OnStar really is of like manufacturers, making, some idea of like Ford Aerospace of like Starlink, and there's other manufacturers that have tracking systems, but predominantly, since, Chevrolet is 108 and operator in business, and Bicentennial pretty much, I've kind of been thinking about, still, the Bicentennial thing and the Scion IQ, and it's 200 thing about the 200-year celebration, the Scion IQ and the Smart for Two smart car, and the smaller version of the Corvette being the Saturn Sky. Yeah, so like those are the three, and like when I was like thinking about the thought of the LexisNexis LFSA compact concept. I mean, it's like the coolest, and it's almost like, like once again, real quick, it's like it's the Chuck Woolery thing and the love connection thing, right? The Vance's love connection, right? Yeah, sure is. Yeah, so it's kind of like the 2 and 2 thing, like from like the Mercedes-Benz, being the 3-point thing about, how I almost see maybe the thought of you know, the issue that I have referred to, like even a student loan and SSI and some relation between all that, as far as like a value of integrating factors of compatibility that way, ultimately getting to a fixture and commercial venue of living quarters as a constant, not necessarily a question of whether or not of a Barbra Streisand song, you know. Yeah. Memories like the corners of my mind, misty watercolor memory of the way we were, scattered pictures. You know, the television and the way the words of the song are, it's almost like really a fixture in real estate. Of the advertisement being, you know, the reality of like gross national product and ergonomic participation that isn't really the question of what relation is of a living quarter. Or whether or not if any reality of anything suggesting anything other than living quarters would maybe only be maybe the thought of maybe knowing or not knowing, if other factors would dictate what might give the appearance of having a right to assemble, or whether or not if participation is like a naive to like, you know, what is the real situation of like every neighborhood. I mean, really right now it seems to be like really anything other than like having, you know, the thought of a commercial venue and living quarter with communications of television likewise in addition, would be, you know, really ridiculously, you know, thinking that, you know, some idea like going through the Garden of Eden again, over, you know, some idea of television programming, or the thought of like not making a grade before I even get to the 12 photo surveys is obviously like YouTube, presenting that like, you know, hey, you know, what's the deal about cyanide Q and the highest possible score on the IQ test being 200, or the pronunciation of cyan, you know, the car. In my mind, you know, the thought of Grover Cleveland, the U.S. $1,000, and even Zion being 64, like 0, and ACTP colon double horse size, likewise the operator, likewise alphanumerically being 108 Chevrolet, and the thing about, you know, the bicentennial and what a quarter is, and living quarter that way, and what a medical power of attorney using a fixture in real estate ultimately seems to be whether or not if the thought of a ergonomic factor would maybe not that it needs to be an excuse, but maybe the thought, maybe the degree and explanation of reputable standards of consensual participation. I mean, if there's any deal about knowing or not knowing, maybe particular situation that might really need that as a factor of ergonomic, that excuses like any accusation or direction that way. I mean, it's like really smart that way. So in that way, it's kind of like thinking that really, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to, you know, somewhere in my mind, I'm thinking about a Sarbanes-Oxley financial estimate of SOX compliance, and some idea of like a, you know, what the real deal is, and in the way of a what writs of habeas corpus might or might not mean, and you know, there's like certain things I need to get into, but you know, I'd use the thought of like a what litigation is. I mean, ultimately, the information provided with supplemental security income, the acronym SSI, or the, you know, the exact opposite, the ISS, or International Space Station, or International Superstar, as compared to supplemental security income, or some idea of some, you know, like phenomenally, like, you know, God, you know, it's like really good to see it. Yeah, but in any case, yeah, so like it's a, you know, the issue of like whether or not of all that integrating principle of practical application is providing a means of like, I mean, if there is a grade to be made beyond the thought of like in need of management, well, you know, I think that being, you know, some idea like a, you know, not limited to, you know, SSI normally benefit that's provided, whether income is not the issue, and that is one of the factors of just not even having a source of income, not that relation, or, you know, some ergonomic factor would, you know, omit the fact of like compatibility, but hey, how about that screensaver? Yeah, all right. Yeah, for real. So anyway, so like, what I'm really getting at is that is a fixture in venue of living quarters predominantly doesn't really seem to be the issue involving television and communications of actually living in a commercial venue as compared to what real estate provides, maybe as the yays and nays, completely the issue of whether or not if Washington, D.C. is really going to identify what Washington, D.C. means in everyone's wallet as the form of the U.S. dollar, or if like whether or not if a duration, what would be maybe a normal daily standard transaction to the bank, only represents the North American Free Trade Act, or maybe even the Deceptive Trades Act, or the thought whether knowing or not knowing is only the truth about that issue right there, or whether if a registered charity would only be the thought of maybe the thought of a only international law of having fair use of, intellectual as an access easement, like the way it really is, and the meaning of value of what having it means, that way as a storage media file, as even auditing legal meeting deposition. I mean, even with whether it's an employment check or an endorsement that way, or even a settlement, or some thought of annuity involving, whether or not the insurance is going to be the ideal if litigation is even involved, or an adjustment that way that would be maybe something that would represent maybe General Motors, that's given the perception of, automatically a promissory note. Not that it would be the idea of a national deficit, just because knowing or not knowing would only be whether or not if, ultimately it seems to be like really whether or not if, the thought of participation is only degreed or non-degreed, or programming, or the availability of information in the form of what a television provides. And, the difference of what I see is like Fox 29 News in Philadelphia, being, some idea of like a Benjamin Franklin 100 Club, or, what it means in night vision of the, Benjamin Franklin flying, the kite in night and lightning striking the key in the middle of the night during a storm. Okay, and all that information, it seems to be like really ultimately getting to like I like describing you, and what that is seemingly like during, give or take maybe 3, maybe 6 on each side of the presidential terms in office of Richard Nixon, presenting, the quadrants on tennis court, or, the 3-month period, or the pi r squared, or 6 months before and 6 months after, or, a bunch of, 480-degree things of like panoramic academia of peripheral tolerance. But anyway, yeah, so like, or the thing of like a double bass drum player, or like, some conductive, participation, some symphonic orchestration, with a full range of 180 degree, about, is it a conductor or semiconductor? But anyway, yeah, so like, getting all that, but I was thinking about that because, I had a whole new perception of that one song, and, tonight it's been a year, and the we met each other here, and it goes on and on and on about, in my heart, I will pretend, and what that really is to economics. I mean, for real, in a way of what I'm referring to as a fixture in real estate, or if really the issue is really, maybe whether a known or not known factor is only the degree level of reputable standards, or not, or, what in reality is going on as compared to maybe, programming on television itself. If advertisement on K television is the only thought of living quarter of gross national product, most people's perception of aggregates, I mean, if that's really any idea of like normal communication on K television, and it's really not. If someone's fortunate enough to hear some like real communications from, people involved at a political science level, that would be a minimum of, a prerequisite beyond a prerequisite at a federal level of political science, getting to like all the economics beyond, the thought of like logistics that way of, predominantly like historic venue, like, statistics, and having some idea of logistics, not necessarily, the thought of like, some idea of like elevation, or some, in any case, so like I was thinking about that because in economics, really finding the academics that include political science as not, I don't think that demographics has to be the word in economics to define the meaning, whether or not it's a political science, including virtually everything involving importing and exporting, or some idea of a business law only being a pie chart in some like circle as compared to a plain horizon of importing and exporting like of international law firms, or, the degree level, or whether it's a degreed or non-degreed issue, or even if the degree is like beyond banking, or, some idea of like total complete electronics, predominantly, whether if that's a continual, never-ending source as, during a lifespan, or representative of, what Roosevelt New Deal Act might suggest or imply, or 6 terms in office. It seemed to be like, once again, the deal about, the idea of 6 between like what the World Trade Center was in, September of 9/11, of what is suggested as 2001, yet, you know, the emergency in 9/11 is like an emergency in, like, the alphanumerics of 95. I mean, you know, the thing about the 1900s and 1995 to 2001 seemed to be the thing about the 9/11, yet 95 as the word alphanumerically being emergency being, you know, 95, and what 911 really is about is emergency in 1995 to, like, you know, 2001 is the difference of 6, or from, like, once again, you know, ABC 13 Houston to ABC 7 Los Angeles presents a difference of 6, and, you know, even the pool table having the issue of, like, the thing about the 6, and continually, you know, what a pool is as compared to what having the right to assemble might only mean as an aggregate, or whether or not there's some idea of litigation, and whether, if de facto is the idea of, like, a writ of habeas corpus presenting maybe some idea of garnishment or consolation in a way, maybe whether, if taxation is only the thought of responsibility, or, you know, maybe not really realizing whether or not if it's the thought of a municipal annuity, or, you know, the thought of whether or not if that's just the idea of whether a department, sometimes the thought of what being involved sometimes would only suggest whether being awarded anything at a departmental level might be some idea of a departmental head getting what would be normally a 5 to 10 year, like, the word, you know how true it is, administratively, as compared to some communication between, you know, administrative over, you know, the thought of a departmental as an employee, or even, you know, thought of an associate under the administrative that way, even at that level, would present maybe the word budget. And, you know, it seems to be like, really, I mean, normally, you know, based upon information, you know, during that time, it seemed like the word award only presented the issue, like, whether if it's going to be a 5 or 10 year budget awarded to a department, a specific department, or if that's really the thought of maybe only what duration means of, I mean, if it's only lifespan, suggesting an intellectual duration of royalty in a different term, in a different application, but the same principle of integration. You know, that I'm thinking about, you know, supplemental security that way, and certain factors of, like, the EBT being like the living quarter, the fixture in a commercial venue of a living quarter. I've seen the card itself, and at the time I didn't think it was, like, the significant deal, or realizing it immediately, you know, like I'm talking about it now. It seemed to be like the thing of, like, the fixture in, like, the commercial venue, as compared to what only the Lone Star card might represent as a single monument or saying software of importing and exporting in the form of, like, immigration customs enforcement, or some idea between the separation of state and what dictates on or offshore, whether commerce dictates what's on or offshore, is ultimately whether if an entire neighborhood even knows, you know, what language is being spoken, like, right next door, or, you know, the thought of communications, maybe, you know, securing equality, you know, of what it means with signal strength that way of mobile communications, you know, or whether knowing or not knowing what the thought of, like, in cooperation, I'll test the emergency broadcast system, you gotta be kidding me, or what in cooperation with federal, state, local authorities isn't normally even explained, you know, in the event of an actual emergency, would have been told, but, I mean, is it really that the explanation is like the Whopper, some co-op, some Whopper issue of the oldest governmental computer mainframe called the Whopper, and it's really not identifying any thought of, like, cooperation with federal, state, local authority, or the co-op, or some, you know, two colors of one bird being the whoopa, the Israeli bird, Israeli being 73, and Israel itself being 64, like an American, and all that stuff, movie, music minus A, and the 64 thing about the HTTP:// and Zion and 0 and the operator ultimately getting, you know, all that stuff that I'm referring to. And it really goes on and on and on that way. And getting in depth with what seemed to be just me skimming the surface alphanumerically and linguistically, I mean, really gets seriously into it. I mean, just talking like this about just, you know, skimming the surface and connecting it all together and in a comprehensible way, and what really has seemingly, you know, in my mind, not limited to me, but, I mean, realizing it, I mean, is really why I said it based upon really experience that originated in June of 1992. Yeah, and because, and you know, how could I excuse it as anything other than a June 14th, 1992 Flag Day issue, which seems to be ultimately during an issue like during the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, the Flag Day, the Flagpole Day. I mean, it's like the big deal like going to school back then, and what is called intermediate, not necessarily that maybe middleware of like the Oracle Corporation would suggest middleware, or the 6th, 7th, 8th grade, or something about the Mercedes-Benz representing some idea of a 3-year period, and whether or not, if chartering, district, and zoning would only represent maybe an easement that way of public education. Because during that time, it seemed to be like the Richard Nixon thing, and him, you know, his last name being Nixon, and like the alphanumerics of 76, likewise, the 200-year celebration between, you know, 1776 and 1976, you know, the 200-year celebration. Well, anyway, so it seemed to be like the thing about the flagpole, and you know, and even during a specific thing about participation on Flag Day of June 14th, 1992, I mean, immediately I didn't think of like, you know, the three, you know, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade as maybe possibly a chartered and district and zoned in the way of only what intellectual would mean of lifespan, of duration, of like, you know, the 3 public grades of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, like a 3-year period. You know, 3 being alphanumerically being 56, or the word Y, or the one letter Y being 25, or the thought of like, you know, even, you know, pronunciation that way of like drum or paper made being 56 is 10 once again. I mean, it seems to be ultimately getting to the thought of whether or not that's really the issue of like some idea of like a baptism, or, you know, the separation between church and state, or some idea of like the transfiguration in the book of Thessalonians, completely the alphanumerics 192. And, you know, like even the State of the Union address that way, and the alphanumerics of that and that fact that way. And really it seems to be ultimately whether or not if all that is originally ultimately to the point whether or not if, you know, some idea of the rapture being the alphanumerics of 99, or you know, or some levitation issue somewhere between the transfiguration and ascending and re-entering heaven, and what the sky alphanumerically is to 55 in heaven. I mean, that way. I mean, what that is to, like, you know, Agent 99 and, you know, Maxwell Get Smart. Maxwell Smart thing, or, you know, the thought of, you know, the 1992 presidential inaugural ball. You know, I had my thing about, you know, some certain factors, and, in any case, so, like, 1992 presidential inaugural ball, it seemed to be, my thought, I'm watching it, and I'm hearing something that really caught my attention, and I'm looking at it, it's kind of like I'm actually wondering if I'm actually seeing 5 different locations of a bunch of identical identity, okay? I mean, looking the same, but, I mean, you know, I've met, you know, identical twins, you know, and it seemed to be like the 1 year of presidential inaugural ball that seemed to be, am I seeing really different versions all the way through the 1992 presidential inaugural ball? And it's kind of like the whole idea and thought about that, because really I know I'd actually experienced something like that, of identical twins and triplets, quadruplets, how many gods only knows, you know, but I was realizing something about that in Pearland, that way of alphanumerics, obviously, or, you know, what that is to, you know, gee, God, like, you're really involved with production, right? Yeah, well, anyway, so in any case, yeah, so like in any case, so like that was something that was coming to the realization of, like, you know, whether it's ever talked about or mentioned, the thing with it is that, involving that one particular deal, it seemed to be like the thing about the Pentagon being, you know, the 5 sides, or, and in something, different versions of the World Trade Center, ultimately it seemed to be like, you know, first it was like a single tower of power, then 2, then it seemed to be the footage of whether or not if it was like footage of like something previous, or made and manufactured to give the appearance that way, or another geographic location, and all that stuff about the World Trade Center, presenting like different versions and viewpoints, and like the entire point was like almost like something in my mind of, you know, and I don't want to just like tag it as something of, you know, giving the appearance or having a form of godness but denying the power thereof, or, you know, some idea of like power and principality in that way. And alphanumerics is so much about that when, like, the algebraic test of inversion is applied to alphanumerics. It might give the appearance of equality, yet in meaning, not that at all. It's really the thought of, like, really, genetics and the thought of, like, if human cloning just has to be the idea of manufacturing, some idea of, like, humanity. Well, in any case, yeah, so, like, I was thinking about it, because that's such, like, a big deal about, really, the way alphanumerics really is, numerically, as compared to the word, although it might give the appearance of alphanumeric equivalence, in meaning and in value is, like, a whole different perspective, but might give the appearance of, the fact about that, or, vice versa, and the complete opposite. But likewise, yeah, so, like, anyway, so, like, I study it that way and think about it that way. But anyway, enough of that right now. But anyway, I was wanting to focus on that because, yeah, I was thinking about that because, of some of the supplemental security income and a student loan. And, I never thought of a student loan as litigation de facto, or risk of habeas corpus, or some idea of garnishment, or some idea of the name of the president, Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, it's like a conflict of interest. Or, for Purple Mountain's majesty above the fruited plain, America, America, like Utah is to a Mormon, like Flag Day is to June. I mean, it's like, is that the idea of Ulysses S. Grant and the 50-50 of Utah? And some idea of, like, June 14th, 1992, on Flag Day, on a Saturday morning being in June, and the 50-50 of what, Ulysses S. Grant seems like, the issue of whether if litigation de facto, and some idea like risk of habeas corpus would only present maybe what a presidential debate really is, whether or not if a patent copyright is the idea of what a trademark might only mean on a verbal level, or, administrative, or the thought of whether or not if active or inactive is only, difference between academic or actual experience. So, kind of like think about that way, because it seemed to be the thought of, supplemental security, as far as, like, the EBT and SNAP food benefits, and the Lone Star card representing maybe even the Sandy Center Monument, or the thought of, like, a memorial, being idea, likewise, something isometric in the way a volume is to a cylindrical value, even pi r squared, of, like, Fred Flintstone's, like, life's the same, I'm moving in stereo, life's the same, except for Fred Flintstone's shoes. I mean, for real, it's like the volume of the, the pi r squared, or the E equal MC squared. I mean, yeah, I think I do see it with Fred Flintstone's idea of, like, all that isometric volume, like, yeah, that way, and that car song, yeah. Rick Ocasek and, I think it's Benjamin Orr, and I'm trying to think of some of the others, but yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, both Benjamin Orr and, Rick Ocasek do the same song. And I think it's like some bands like Queensryche, that song, Last Time in Paris, or the thought that one song, some bands do that. They play one song, and it's like not on any compact disc during when it's played on the radio. Or it's just a geographic attachment of only a specific duration, and not even available on what would be normally the thought of during when, the release of the compact disc was when the song was playing on the radio, but not even on the compact disc at the same duration when that, like, was all happening. But later, like on, like a Queensryche, compact disc, that one particular song, Last Time in Paris, is like that fact. And Queensryche being all alphanumerics of 140, and something in my mind of, Pearland, Texas, that way of, the alphanumerics of 104, Highway 59, like one of the oldest, national landmarks of Highway 59, and the alphanumerics of, like that is 140, or that applied with, the alphanumerics of 41 in USA, equating to 181, Houston, Texas, way international, and electronic power that way. But in any case, that's just like one of many that is an automatic, immediate, like, mental, like, reflex of, like, knowing that, being, like, what, obviously it's like, my interest in alphanumerics and linguistics that way is an automatic identifier. What I normally practice anyway when a standard is, my thought of, like, as a drummer, like, anyway. So, like, any case, so, like, anyways, it's already going on, like, God, 54 minutes, and pretty close to 55 minutes right now. in like 54 seconds. Yeah, so like anyway, I'm going to I think I'm gonna go ahead and try and get that compatibility between, you know, whether or not if the thought of like a promissory notes is the thought of whether or not if de facto is only the memory minus de facto equating to 35, and what human capital is in investment terminology beyond the thought of an acronym of saying software, whether it's a storage area network or securities and annuities network or some idea of what participation means in warehousing or maybe gross national product or aggregates that way of what having the right to assemble is, whether participation is going to participate anyway, or whether it's a demanded standard, whether, you know, knowing or not knowing is really the issue of whether practice makes perfect, or even knowing, you know, maybe practice makes perfect, maybe ought to be as positive in making the best of it, like all the way through it anyway. And normally I'm that way anyway. But anyway, so like the thought of like a supplemental security and SSI and the International Space Station or International Superstar, or, you know, what the deal is about some idea of like if it has to be equilibrium or elevation of some like J. Edgar Hoover thing, being all amphibious about, you know, getting above it all of a local area network, or what some idea of like wide area network would only maybe present of circuit going through the thought of what that only means to like Geneva, Switzerland to be in venue of a horizontal rectangle, and how true it is if it's the be in venue all the time, or even identified as the be in venue of human civil rights, or if it's really ultimately getting to the international law of ultimately getting to like human capital of investment terminology, ultimately getting to international import and export in a plain horizon as compared to, you know, going beyond business law of a pie chart. So all the talk is Americans, hot dogs, and apple pie might be the thought of maybe only a baseball field, or maybe what RC only means to a hood ornament, or, you know, some idea of Apple Mac, Apple Mac, you know, Book Pro or something like that, in a way of like you know, some idea of like what Peter built is to like so is that art linked letter with Peter with the pearly gaze? Yeah, and he brought his own roll of toilet paper, right? Yeah, with all the names written in the Book of Life. Yeah, sure. You are listening, huh? Yeah, great. The real evangelist, right? Yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah, the real evangelist, yeah. So anyways, like in any case, yeah, so like, I'm kind of like getting to the point where I need to take a break. It's already going like 1 hour, pretty close to like 2 minutes and about 15 seconds, yeah, so. In any case, yeah, so I might get back and actually stay in direction of where I really wanted to start with about the SSI and the ISS and the student loan representative, you know, some idea of like the patent pending as compared to maybe that patent pending being only the thought of what litigation is to de facto, or writs of habeas corpus that might present the, you know, the idea between Wyatt Earp and exclusionary rule provision that way of executive powers, governmental amnesties, and sovereign immunities, getting to the John Wayne thing about the gold rush. Yeah, true for so. Anyway, I'm going to have to take a break. It's already, I'll do it again and stay on that stuff where I'm thinking about the student loan that way. Of whether if litigation and writs of habeas corpus is only presenting what a presidential debate only presents, you know, during election year, or really if it's really not even a Republican and Democratic issue, or libertarian that way. It ultimately seems to be really the issue going, you know, beyond the thought and commercial of advertisement of math is power, or, you know, the idea of going beyond calculus into quantum. And all that after from like 92 of calculus and Pentagon, and you know, the reserve reverse, or the thought of reserve being the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, or the thought of, you know, even my thought of First City National Bank. I mean, First City National Bank only means the first national bank to leave, you know, the categorization of money. If First City National Bank is or is not limited to the U.S. dollar, I'm pretty sure that would include the thought of whether if Exchange Commission is only thought of comptrolling, and some idea of regulatory commission or exchange commission, or the thought of like international banking systems using circuit and currency over the categorization of money of the U.S. dollar, beyond, you know, a method of banking. and what internet protocol dictates whether if local area networks only the real deal. Going through the circuit of like EA Sports and yeah, I'm gonna take a break. It's already like 1 hour exactly right now. So anyway, yeah, I'll get back and maybe do that maybe tomorrow night. But anyway, yeah, there it is. Yeah.